What would you do if your own child dragged you into court, trying to strip away everything you built with your late spouse? Betrayal, this deep cuts more than any knife. If you've ever faced or witnessed a story like this, share your thoughts below. Your voice matters. And if you're watching from the very beginning, drop a comment so we know you're here with us. Stay tuned. This is a journey you won't forget. The first sound that sliced through the hushed chamber wasn't the shuffle of polished leather shoes or the scrape of a chair leg against marble. It was the sharp crack of the gavel, one clean strike that echoed across the courtroom like a shot fired into still water. And then, a pause. An unnatural, trembling pause. Judge Robert Stanton's hand froze midair. The gavel slipped slightly in his grip, as though its weight had grown too heavy. He looked down, not at the polished bench, not at the papers in front of him, but at me, his gaze locked in place, cutting through the silence. "That's her," he whispered. The words were not meant for the room. They were meant for himself, an involuntary slip, but the microphone carried them farther than he intended. A ripple of gasps moved through the gallery. Heads turned, whispers erupted, and then all at once every eye swung toward me. I, Margaret Whitmore, 65 years old, sat at the defense table, spine straight against the wooden chair, palms pressed together in my lap. I felt their stares like arrows. My chest tightened, but outwardly I remained still. If there was one thing widowhood had taught me, it was how to carry silence. Across from me at the petitioner's table sat my son, my only child. Daniel Whitmore adjusted his navy blue tie, his jaw flexing as though he'd bitten something bitter. His dark hair was styled to perfection, his suit cut sharp, Vanessa's influence, no doubt. Next to him, she leaned in, whispering something that made the corner of his mouth twitch into a thin smile. Vanessa Kane Whitmore, my daughter-in-law, wore confidence like perfume, heavy, suffocating. Her tailored jacket clung to her shoulders, her nails gleamed polished red, her eyes shimmered with satisfaction. She had orchestrated this day down to the last second, and she sat with the glow of someone convinced the victory was already hers. I didn't need to hear her whisper to know what she said. I had lived long enough with that smug curve of her lips. She thinks I'm finished. The courtroom carried its own scent, a blend of wood, polish, dust, and the faint tang of burnt coffee from the bailiff's thermos. A massive clock loomed above the double doors, its second hand clicking louder than my heartbeat. On the wall to the right, the American flag draped down in solemn folds, the red and white stripes illuminated by morning light streaming through tall windows. I should have felt shielded by it, the way Richard always said the flag stood for fairness, for dignity, for the right of every citizen to be heard. But this morning, beneath that symbol, I felt stripped bare. The system wasn't protecting me, it was weighing me, measuring whether my years had made me weak enough to discard. The benches behind me overflowed with neighbors and strangers alike. Some I recognized from the grocery store or the Methodist church where Richard and I once sat every Sunday. Others were simply curious onlookers, hungry for small-town drama to spice their otherwise ordinary week. Their faces carried that blend of sympathy and judgment. Americans wear so well, half pity, half suspicion. I straightened my blouse and focused on the grain of the wooden table before me. It was easier than looking at Daniel's eyes. Attorney Philip Drake, slick-haired and barely past 35, stood first. His suit was charcoal, his tie silver, his confidence blinding. He thrived on performance, and the courtroom was his stage. "Your Honor," Drake began, his voice smooth as honey, "we are here today for one reason only, to protect the dignity and well-being of Mrs. Whitmore." The irony nearly choked me. Protect? By stripping me of my rights? Drake continued, pacing in practiced steps. "My clients, Daniel and Vanessa Whitmore, have acted only out of love and concern. In recent months, Mrs. Whitmore has exhibited troubling lapses in judgment. She has failed to maintain her property responsibly, misplaced important bills, and refused reasonable offers to relocate into safer housing." He paused, allowing the words failed and refused to hang in the air like accusations carved into stone. "Furthermore," he said, "she has increasingly isolated herself, turning away from the very family members who wish only to support her. For her own protection and for the integrity of her estate, we ask this court to recognize her incompetence in managing her financial affairs." A wave of murmurs rippled behind me. I could feel the judgment seeping into my bones. Incompetence, such a clinical, brutal word. I wanted to rise, to shout that I had paid every bill for 40 years, that my home was not a hazard but a sanctuary, that solitude is not weakness, it's survival. But I stayed silent, my hands folded tighter, nails pressing half-moons into my skin, because sometimes silence carries more weight than words. Judge Stanton shifted again, his eyes never leaving me. There was something there, not pity, not suspicion, but recognition, as though my face had stepped out of the fog of his past and planted itself in his present. "That's her," he repeated, softer this time. Drake faltered mid-sentence. Daniel looked up, confused, irritation flashing in his eyes. Vanessa frowned. I sat still, but inside me a current surged, because I knew why Stanton's voice shook. Somewhere in his memory, buried under years of cases and rulings, was a piece of me. Something I had once done, something he hadn't forgotten. And now, in this room where everything seemed stacked against me, that buried memory had chosen to claw its way back. Daniel's coldness. "Mom?" Daniel's voice cut the silence, colder than Vermont ice in January. "You could stop this right now. Just sign. No one wants to hurt you." The gallery stirred. People leaned forward, straining to catch my reaction. Vanessa's smirk grew sharper, her nails drumming softly on the table as if keeping time to Daniel's cruelty. My son, the boy I had nursed through scarlet fever, the teenager I had driven to baseball practice at 6 in the morning, the man I had hugged tight when he graduated college, that boy was gone. What sat across from me was a stranger, molded by ambition and by Vanessa's whispering voice. I wanted to reach across the years, to shake him free from her grip, but his eyes were steel. He wasn't reaching back. I didn't answer him. I didn't cry or plead. I simply breathed, each inhale measured, each exhale steady. In America, silence can be louder than thunder. It is the pause before the anthem at a ball game, the breath held before a jury's verdict, the space between a question and its answer. My silence was not surrender. It was defiance, a refusal to let them script my dignity. I caught Linda Harris's eyes in the gallery, my neighbor, my friend. She gave me the smallest nod, as if to say, "Hold steady, don't let them see you break." So I didn't. Judge Stanton cleared his throat, his composure fraying. He struck the gavel again, but it sounded weaker, more hesitant. "Proceed," he ordered, though his voice betrayed him. Drake shuffled his notes. Vanessa leaned even closer to Daniel, whispering furiously now, as if her careful script was unraveling. Daniel clenched his fists. And yet, through all their movements, the air in the room clung to that one question, unspoken but undeniable. Why did the judge recognize Margaret Whitmore? The trial moved forward, the legal language filling the chamber, but I no longer heard it. All I could hear was Stanton's voice echoing in my head. "That's her." I sat straighter, pressing my palms against the cool wood of the table, feeling the grain beneath my skin. Something had shifted. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the balance tilt ever so slightly, not in their favor, but in mine. The gavel had fallen, but it hadn't closed the matter. It had opened a door, and the question that now burned, unspoken but alive, was this. What secret bound Judge Robert Stanton and Margaret Whitmore, and why had it come back to life in this courtroom? The courthouse moment, the judge's whisper, the gavel slipping from his hand faded like a dream I wasn't ready to wake from. My story did not begin under fluorescent lights and polished oak. It began in a quiet house in Burlington, Vermont, with mornings stitched together by coffee and silence, and nights that seemed longer because I was the only one left to count the hours. Before betrayal ever reached my doorstep, my life moved with a rhythm both fragile and steady. If you've ever lived alone after a long marriage, you know what I mean. The sound of the coffee maker in the morning, the creak of the porch step in the afternoon, the sigh of wind pressing against old windows at night, these noises become your companions. But silence is tricky. Sometimes it comforts you like a quilt. Other times, it presses against your chest like a stone you can't move. Burlington is not a city people rush to. It's one they settle into. The winters here are sharp, cutting down to the bone, and the summers hum with lake breezes and farmers markets on Church Street. My house sits on a modest lot not far from Lake Champlain. On a clear day, if you stand on the porch and squint past the rooftops, you can see the shimmer of water reflecting the Sunday. Richard and I had bought this place in the late 70s, when interest rates felt like mountains and we thought $40,000 was a kingdom's ransom. We raised Daniel here, painted the walls ourselves, argued over wallpaper, planted a little maple tree that is now taller than the house itself. Every inch of the home holds fingerprints of the life we built. The garden was always Richard's pride. He had a soldier's discipline but an artist's patience, especially when it came to his bonsai. Some men pour themselves into cars or fishing boats. Richard poured himself into miniature trees. Each branch, each curve, was a conversation between him and time. After he died, the bonsai became mine to keep alive. I never shaped them the way he did, but I watered them faithfully, talked to them as though he still heard me. When you're older, the cast of your life shrinks. Friends pass away. Children move on. The ones left become pillars, no matter how small. For me, that meant Linda Harris, my neighbor, 72, with a hearty laugh and a sharp tongue when she thought someone was being cruel. She walked Duke, her golden Labrador, at 6 every morning, rain or shine. Sometimes she knocked on my door just to bring me pie, claiming she had baked too much. I knew better. She had baked exactly enough for 2 women who hated to eat alone. And then there was Daniel, my boy, my only child. If you've raised one, you know the paradox: your heart swells with pride, but also breaks more easily because there's no other child to balance the weight. Daniel had his father's eyes, but not his steadiness. He tried God. He tried, but the world never seemed to let him stand too long before knocking him down again. His marriage to Vanessa had changed everything. Vanessa Kane Whitmore. Young, sharp, dressed in clothes that always seemed too polished for our small town. She had a way of looking at our home like she was measuring its square footage rather than remembering the birthdays celebrated inside. Her voice was sweet when she wanted it to be, but beneath it was a blade. The morning before the first confrontation, my day unfolded like any other. I woke before dawn, slipped my swollen feet into slippers, and shuffled to the kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the air with that sharp, comforting smell. I poured my cup, cradled it against my chest, and stood at the window. Outside, frost still clung to the grass, sparkling faintly beneath the porch light. A delivery truck rumbled down the street. Somewhere, a dog barked. On the kitchen table sat Richard's leather notebook. The cover was stained with a coffee ring from years ago. I touched it lightly, not ready to open it yet. Some things, even after 10 years, feel too heavy for a morning. Instead, I turned to the bonsai by the window. Its tiny branches reached upward, as though straining for light. I whispered, "Good morning, love," as if Richard might answer. That's how my days began. Quiet rituals, quiet strength. But I didn't know that silence was also teaching me how to endure what was coming. When Daniel called to say he and Vanessa would come for dinner, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we could share a meal. Maybe laughter would return to the house. I roasted a chicken with rosemary and lemon, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds. Food is a love language we never forget. They arrived with the sharp scent of Vanessa's perfume filling the doorway. Daniel kissed my cheek, distracted, while she swept past me with her heels clicking against the hardwood. Dinner began politely enough. Vanessa complimented the roast, though she hardly touched it. Daniel spoke of work, vague words about projects that I knew masked the truth he wasn't working at all. Still, I let him speak without interruption. A mother learns when silence is kinder than questions. And then Vanessa placed the manila folder on the table. "This is just to make things easier," she said, sliding it toward me with manicured nails. Inside were the documents: transfer of deed, power of attorney, all marked with yellow tabs where my signature should go. My chest tightened as I read the words. It wasn't just paper, it was my erasure. "Vanessa, I don't understand," I said quietly. "It's simple," she replied, her voice coated in honey but her eyes cold. "This house is too much for you. Daniel and I can take care of it. We'll make sure you're comfortable. A condo in town, perhaps. No stairs, no worry. Isn't that better? I looked to Daniel, but his gaze stayed fixed on his plate. His silence was louder than her words. This house, I said, placing my hand flat on the oak table Richard built, is not just walls. It is where Richard and I built our lives, where Daniel grew up, where love lived. Vanessa's smile never faltered. And love isn't tied to a structure. Isn't Richard's legacy your comfort, your safety? Her manipulation was precise, rehearsed. She wanted me to believe surrender was mercy. But something in me, some ember Richard left behind, burned brighter. I closed the folder and pushed it back. I will not sign. The rest of dinner bled into silence. Vanessa hardly hid her irritation. Daniel muttered about being tired. When they left, the scent of her perfume lingered longer than their words. I cleared the plates alone. The chicken I had roasted with such hope sat half-eaten, cold. I scrubbed the dishes by hand, the warm water stinging my joints. With each plate, I felt the weight of betrayal press harder. From across the street, Linda's porch light flicked on. She stood there, apron still dusted with flour, Duke by her side. She raised her hand in a quiet wave, her eyes searching mine. I forced a small smile and waved back. That was Linda, never intruding, but always present. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the bonsai in the corner glowing faintly under the lamp. My hands trembled as I opened Richard's notebook for the first time in years. His handwriting reached across time. "Margaret, protect it. Trust your judgment." The words cut straight through my grief and my fear. He had known there would be a day I'd have to stand alone. I pressed the notebook to my chest, whispering, "I will, Richard. I promise." But just as I closed the notebook, headlights swept across the window. A car slowed at the curb. Vanessa's car. She sat inside, engine humming, her face lit by the glow of her phone. Why had she come back? What was she waiting for in the dark, outside my home? The answer, I feared, would change everything. The glow of Vanessa's phone screen lit her face as she sat in the car outside my home. I watched from the window, clutching Richard's notebook to my chest, my stomach twisted. No one returns after midnight without reason. She stayed a few minutes, then pulled away. The taillights faded, leaving me with only questions and the thudding of my heart. Sleep would not come that night. The next afternoon, as I trimmed the bonsai and tried to shake off the unease, the crunch of tires on gravel broke the quiet. Through the curtains, I saw Vanessa again, this time stepping out in a tailored gray suit. Beside her stood a tall man carrying a leather briefcase. He scanned my property with a detached precision, the way a butcher sizes up a cut of meat. I stepped onto the porch. "Vanessa? What's this about?" She smiled too brightly. "Margaret, this is Mr. Alden. He's a realtor. Just taking a quick look. Nothing to trouble you with." My throat tightened. "This is my home. You will not treat it like a showroom." The man avoided my gaze, jotting notes on a pad as he walked the perimeter. Vanessa trailed behind him, pointing at the porch, the roofline, even the bonsai by the window. Her voice was cheerful, but every word cut. Yes, original hardwood, spacious yard, good resale potential. Inside, they walked as if they owned the place. The realtor's polished shoes tapped across Richard's old floors. He admired the fireplace, the built-in shelves Richard had crafted decades ago. Vanessa ran her manicured fingers along the mantel and said, "Outdated, but with the right touch it could look modern." I stood rooted in the living room, heat rising in my chest. My hands shook, but I forced my voice steady. "You need to leave. Now." Vanessa tilted her head, pity dripping from her smile. "Don't be difficult, Margaret. We're just exploring options." Her words stung deeper than any shout. Options. As though my life, my memories, the very walls Richard built were negotiable. Before I could answer, the front door creaked open. Linda stood there, apron still dusted with flour, Duke's leash wrapped around her wrist. Her voice was calm but carried iron. "Vanessa, what exactly are you doing in Margaret's home without permission?" Vanessa stiffened. "This doesn't concern you, Linda." "It does," Linda replied, stepping fully inside. "I've lived across the street for 30 years. I know what Richard built here, and I know when a neighbor is being bullied." The realtor cleared his throat, suddenly uneasy. Perhaps we should reschedule. Yes, I said firmly. Reschedule to never. Vanessa's smile faltered for the first time. She snatched the folder of notes from the realtor and stormed toward the door. You're only making this harder on yourself, she hissed. Linda placed a steady hand on my shoulder as the door slammed. My knees trembled, but I stood tall beside her. Don't let them break you, Margaret, she whispered. You're stronger than you think. That night, the house felt colder. I locked the doors, drew the curtains, and sat at the kitchen table. The documents Vanessa had left before still sat in the drawer, their edges curling like a sneer. I opened Richard's notebook again, searching for strength. Between financial notes and bonsai sketches, I found a page I hadn't noticed before. Not all who smile mean well. Protect what we built. Trust your judgment, even if it means standing alone. The ink had faded, but the words burned. He had known betrayal might come not from strangers, but from within. I pressed my forehead against the page, whispering, You were right, Richard. You knew this day would come. The following week brought uneasy calm. I busied myself with chores, sweeping the porch, polishing Richard's old tools, cooking simple meals. But every ring of the phone, every envelope in the mailbox, made my stomach tighten. Linda checked on me daily, bringing casseroles I could barely taste. You're not alone, she reminded me. I nodded, but at night, when the house grew silent, doubt crept back in. Would Daniel ever stand beside me again, or had Vanessa already erased me from his heart? On Friday afternoon, a sharp knock rattled the front door. I froze, dish towel in hand. When I opened it, no one stood there. Only an envelope lay on the porch. Heavy paper, neat lettering, the kind lawyers use. My hands trembled as I carried it to the kitchen. I broke the seal and read, Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, you are hereby summoned to meet with attorney Philip Drake, representing your son Daniel Whitmore and his wife, Vanessa Kane Whitmore. The words blurred. They were escalating. This wasn't just family manipulation anymore. It was war. I placed the letter beside Richard's notebook, my silver wedding band glinting in the lamplight. The air in the house felt heavy, charged, as though the walls themselves braced for what was coming. From across the street, Linda's light flicked on. She stood on her porch, watching, as if she sensed the storm building. I whispered into the silence, They think I'm weak. But they don't know what Richard left me. They don't know I am not alone. My heart pounded. I traced the words Richard had written, Trust your judgment. The clock ticked louder, each second a drumbeat of the battle ahead. The letter still lay open, its black ink glaring. At the bottom, one line caught my breath. Failure to respond will result in a petition to declare you legally incompetent. The words hung in the air like a noose. I gripped the notebook, whispering through clenched teeth. Over my dead body. But a question clawed at me, refusing to be silenced. How far was Vanessa willing to go, and what secret did she hold that even Daniel didn't know? The envelope on my kitchen table glared at me for 2 days before I gathered the courage to face it. Each morning I'd pour my coffee, stare at the neat black lettering, and feel my stomach twist tighter. It wasn't just paper. It was a summons, a declaration that family had turned into adversary, and that I was expected to walk willingly into their chosen battlefield. By Monday morning, I knew I could stall no longer. I pressed Richard's notebook to my chest before slipping it into my purse. His words, protect it. Trust your judgment felt heavier than the paper itself. I buttoned my coat against the Vermont chill, locked the door behind me, and walked down the driveway where patches of old snow still clung stubbornly to the gravel. The law office of Philip Drake sat on Main Street in downtown Burlington, wedged between a cafe that smelled of burnt espresso and a boutique that sold sweaters priced higher than my monthly electricity bill. Its glass doors gleamed, the brass handle polished, the lettering across the front neat and pretentious. Drake and Associates, Family and Estate Law. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and money. The waiting room was painted in muted grays, the kind of color that sucked warmth from the walls. Diplomas lined the hallway, each frame screaming legitimacy. Behind the reception desk sat a young woman in a black blazer, her hair in a tight bun, her smile polite but indifferent. Mrs. Whitmore? she asked, glancing at her clipboard. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than my heart. Right this way. They're expecting you. They. The word stung. Not he, the lawyer, but they. The conference room was a cavern of glass and steel. A long mahogany table stretched across the center, its surface gleaming like ice. At one end sat Philip Drake, every inch of him tailored and polished. His cufflinks caught the light as he shuffled papers into neat piles. Across from him, Vanessa lounged in her seat as though it were her living room sofa, her red nails drumming against the armrest. I took my seat at the opposite end, folding my hands in my lap. Mrs. Whitmore, Drake began, his tone oiled with civility. Thank you for joining us. We'd like to resolve this matter amicably, without the need for lengthy litigation. Then you should tear up those papers, I replied. Vanessa's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, Drake continued smoothly, your son and his wife only want what's best for you. These documents are designed to ensure your estate is protected and that your needs are met. This is a standard procedure for someone at your stage of life. My stage of life, I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. You mean being old. You mean being alone. You think that makes me weak. Drake leaned back, unfazed. It makes you vulnerable, and my clients are simply trying to safeguard your future. My future belongs to me, I said sharply. Not to you, not to them. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice dripping with mock concern. Margaret, please, we're offering you security. You'll never have to worry about bills again. We'll handle everything. Doesn't that sound like peace of mind? Peace of mind. That phrase again. She wielded it like a weapon, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. This wasn't about peace. It was about control. The door opened, and Daniel entered. My heart stumbled at the sight of him. He looked tired, shadows beneath his eyes, his tie loosened as if he'd struggled just to arrive. He took the seat beside Vanessa, his hand brushing hers in a silent pledge. Mom, he said softly, this doesn't have to be a fight. Please, just sign. Let us take care of you. The boy I once cradled was gone, replaced by a man who couldn't see the chains being fastened around both our ankles. His voice cracked, though, and in that crack I heard the son I once knew, the one who had loved baseball and strawberry ice cream, the one who cried when Richard left for deployments. But he wasn't strong enough to break free of her grip. Not yet. I will not sign, I said again, my voice low but steady. Drake sighed, as though patience were a luxury he could afford. He slid a new document across the table. This is a revised agreement. We've simplified the language, reduced the scope. It grants your son limited authority only in cases where you may be incapacitated. It's a compromise. I didn't touch the paper. A compromise built on a lie is still a lie. Vanessa's smile finally cracked. You're being unreasonable, Margaret. Do you really want this dragged into court? Do you want your name smeared, your dignity questioned in public? I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the table. You underestimate me, Vanessa. I have lived through deployments, through burying the man I loved, through raising a son alone. You think I'm afraid of a courtroom? You think you can shame me into surrender? You don't know me at all. The room fell silent. Even Drake shifted in his seat. Daniel's eyes darted between us, torn, but he said nothing. I stood, sliding Richard's notebook from my purse. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The weight of it was enough. This meeting is over, I said. As I walked toward the door, Vanessa's voice followed, sharp as broken glass. You can't fight us forever. We'll get what we want, one way or another. I didn't turn back. I didn't give her the satisfaction. But as I stepped out onto Main Street, the cold Vermont air burning my cheeks, I felt the first tremor of fear. Because beneath her threat, I had heard certainty. The Vermont wind slapped me awake as I stepped onto Main Street. I gripped Richard's notebook inside my purse as if it were a shield. People hurried past, bundled in coats, carrying coffee cups that steamed in the cold. To them, I was just another older woman walking against the current of traffic. They couldn't know that I had just faced my own son across a battlefield, dressed as a conference table. I walked the 3 blocks back to where I had parked my aging Buick. My knees ached from the cold, my breath fogged with each step. As I slid into the driver's seat, the tears came, not loud sobs, but the quiet kind that sting your throat and make the world blur. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and whispered, "Richard, I don't know how much longer I can fight them alone." But alone was no longer an option. Vanessa had shown her hand. She was willing to bring strangers into my home, to parade realtors across Richard's floors, to drag lawyers into our family. And Daniel, my Daniel, was too blind to see it. I drove home slowly, each red light stretching longer than the last. Burlington looked the same as it always had, students walking with backpacks slung over one shoulder, couples holding hands, shopkeepers sweeping salt from their doorsteps. But to me, the whole town felt altered, as though I were seeing it through glass that had cracked just enough to distort every angle. When I pulled into my driveway, Linda was already waiting on her porch. Duke bounded down the steps to greet me, tail wagging furiously. Linda crossed the street, her face etched with concern. "Well?" she asked. I shook my head. "They won't stop, Linda. They won't stop until they take everything." She placed a hand on my arm. "Then you don't stop either. You still have fight in you, Margaret. I can see it." Her words warmed me more than the coat on my back. I invited her in for tea, and while the kettle whistled, I laid out the latest document Drake had pushed across the table. Linda scanned the lines, her lips thinning. "This isn't protection," she said. "It's a noose. They want control over every decision you make. I've seen enough family squabbles in this town to know where this leads." "To court," I said flatly. "To war," she corrected. That night, long after Linda had gone home and Duke's barking had faded into the dark, I sat again with Richard's notebook. My fingers traced the faded ink, the words that felt like whispers from another life. I turned a page I hadn't dared touch before. Scribbled in the margin was a phrase that made my chest tighten. "Not all debts are financial." I read it again and again, trying to decipher what he had meant. Had Richard known something? Had he left me a warning not just about money, but about trust? The next morning, my answer came in the most unexpected way. I was returning from the grocery store, struggling with bags heavier than they used to feel, when I saw Vanessa's car parked outside the cafe across from the law office. She wasn't alone. Through the cafe's wide window, I saw her seated across from a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, his suit darker than Drake's, his posture exuding quiet power. Vanessa leaned in close, her smile sharp, her hand brushing his as she slid a folder across the table. The man opened it, glanced at the papers, then nodded. My stomach dropped. This wasn't Drake. This wasn't Daniel. This was someone else entirely, someone Vanessa trusted enough to meet in public, but secretively enough to lean in like co-conspirators. I ducked behind a parked truck, heart hammering. I watched as she placed her hand on his wrist and whispered something that made him chuckle. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and showed him something on the screen. His smile widened. A cold certainty washed over me. Vanessa wasn't just manipulating Daniel. She was building something larger, a web I couldn't yet see the edges of. I stumbled back to my car, groceries forgotten in the trunk. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. Questions swarmed. Who was that man? What was in the folder? What secret had Vanessa kept even from Daniel? That night, I could barely eat. I sat in the dark kitchen, Richard's notebook open, the phrase haunting me. Not all debts are financial. Had Vanessa entangled Daniel in something deeper than greed for a house? Had she promised something to someone else? Something that involved me? The thought kept me awake long after midnight. I rose and wandered the house, touching the frames Richard had built, the photographs of Daniel as a boy, the quilt I had stitched by hand. Each object was a reminder of what was at stake. Near 2 a.m, I stood at the window. Across the street, Linda's porch light flicked on, though I hadn't seen her step outside. Was she awake too, sensing my unrest? I raised my hand to the glass, as if reaching for an ally who could see what I could not. The town was silent. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, each second stretching thinner, sharper. I whispered into the empty room, "Richard, what did you know that I don't?" 2 days later, another envelope arrived, this one heavier than the last, sealed with a crimson wax stamp instead of glue. No return address, only my name in sharp, deliberate handwriting. I carried it inside, my pulse quickening. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the seal, unable to break it. Something about it felt older, darker, more dangerous than legal documents or realtors scribbling on pads. When I finally slid the letter opener under the flap, the paper inside was brief, only one line, written in bold black ink. "Meet me before you lose everything. Do not tell Daniel. Do not tell Vanessa." There was no signature, only an address scrawled at the bottom, a place on the outskirts of Burlington I hadn't visited in years. I sat frozen, the note trembling in my hands. Who had sent it? And why warn me against my own family? Margaret gripped the steering wheel of her aging Ford, the hum of the tires against the highway mixing with the steady thump of her heart. Vermont's back roads wound endlessly, lined with trees burning in shades of late autumn gold and deep crimson. Every bend in the road seemed to whisper Richard's name, as if the landscape itself still carried his presence. She lowered the window slightly, letting the cool breeze sting her cheeks, grounding her in the present, yet the ache of memory clung like smoke. The drive felt both too long and too short. Too long because anticipation gnawed at her stomach. Too short because she was not ready to confront the truth waiting for her in that remote cabin. She had not been up this far north since Richard passed, and each familiar landmark tugged at an old memory. A general store where they once stopped for coffee. A winding ridge where Richard pulled over just to show her how the light hit the mountains. He had always been that kind of man, pausing to appreciate what others rushed past. Margaret wondered if she had ever told him enough how much that steadiness meant to her. Her thoughts returned to the meeting with Karen. The attorney's office, polished and intimidating, contrasted sharply with Karen herself, calm, direct, a woman who had been part of Richard's life before Margaret ever knew him. The fact unsettled her, but it also felt oddly comforting. Karen had spoken with a mix of authority and gentleness, as though she had been waiting years to guide Margaret to this exact point. When she slid the heavy envelope across the desk, Margaret's hands had trembled. Inside lay more than deeds or bank statements. There was Richard's handwriting, his voice preserved in ink. Karen said only, "He wanted you to find this in your own time." Now that envelope sat on the passenger seat, its corner worn from Margaret's nervous fingertips brushing it again and again. She had not dared to open it yet, afraid the truth inside might be too heavy to bear while driving. The cabin would be the place. Their place, tucked away near Silver Creek, where Richard had once promised her they would grow old together. As she turned onto the gravel road leading to the property, her breath caught. The cabin emerged slowly from between the trees, its weathered wood blending with the forest. The porch sagged slightly, but the structure still stood proud, as though defying time itself. Margaret parked and sat still for a moment, her hands gripping the wheel. The silence around her was immense, broken only by the cry of a distant bird and the rustle of leaves. She whispered aloud, "Richard, I'm here," as if he might step out onto the porch to greet her. The cabin smelled of cedar and faint ash, remnants of old fires. Dust motes drifted lazily through the slanted beams of afternoon sun that spilled through the windows. Margaret's footsteps echoed as she walked inside, each creak of the floorboards like an old friend speaking up after years of silence. She remembered the weekends they spent here when Ethan was just a boy, running outside until his cheeks turned red from the chill. Richard used to sit by the fireplace, notebook balanced on his knee, always jotting something down. She thought they were only household budgets or idle musings, never realizing those notebooks carried the architecture of their future. She set the envelope on the wooden dining table, its surface scarred with the faint grooves of meals cooked and stories told. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside, neatly arranged, were deeds, records, and a letter marked simply, "For Margaret." She unfolded it carefully. Richard's handwriting swept across the page in familiar loops, his voice rising vividly in her mind. "My love, if you are reading this, I am gone. But what we built is not gone. The house is only one piece. There are accounts, properties, investments, everything I never spoke of because I wanted to carry the weight myself. I trusted Karen to guide you when the time was right. Do not let fear make you small. Protect what we built, even if Ethan does not yet understand. He may be blinded, but he is still our son. And you, Margaret, you are stronger than you know. Tears blurred the ink as she traced his name at the bottom. The paper trembled in her hands, not from age, but from the weight of revelation. Margaret leaned back in the chair, her breath ragged. Richard had hidden not only wealth but responsibility. She thought of the endless nights she worried about money, about keeping the house. And all along he had prepared something larger, something he must have known would one day protect her from betrayal. She pulled out the deeds, her eyes scanning the neat signatures and seals. Small rental properties in Burlington, a stretch of land near Middlebury, even a share in a bookstore Richard once mentioned fondly but never said he owned. Margaret's heart pounded with a mixture of awe and dread. It was too much for one woman alone. No wonder Karen had been firm. This was more than sentiment. This was a shield Richard had left her, but also a burden she now had to carry. As the light outside dimmed into late afternoon, Margaret lit the old lantern on the table. Its glow illuminated the scattered documents, turning them into fragile artifacts of a past she only partly knew. She felt as though she were meeting Richard again, but this time through the quiet truth of his foresight. Her fingers brushed over one deed in particular, Silver Creek, the land surrounding this very cabin. Written in Richard's hand on the margin were the words, "For her peace." Margaret pressed her lips together, fighting back sobs. He had always known she would need refuge, a place untouched by Marissa's schemes or Ethan's wavering loyalty. But why had he not told her? Why let her suffer the humiliation of Marissa walking through her home with a realtor, acting as if Margaret were already gone? She whispered into the stillness, "Richard, why didn't you trust me with this sooner?" No answer came, only the settling creak of the cabin and the gentle sway of branches outside. Yet in the silence, she felt him, not as memory but as presence. Strong, steady, urging her forward. She gathered the documents back into the envelope, tucking the letter safely inside her cardigan pocket. As she prepared to leave, something caught her eye near the fireplace. An old wooden box, one Richard used to keep tools in. Curiosity pushed her toward it. The lid groaned as she lifted it, revealing not tools but another set of papers, bound with twine. Her heart raced. Slowly, she unwrapped the bundle and found more notes in Richard's handwriting. Some were lists of numbers, others letters never sent, and one addressed directly to Karen. Margaret's pulse quickened. If Richard had trusted Karen this deeply, then Karen must know more than she had revealed. Why had she held back? What else had Richard hidden between the lines of their quiet life? As Margaret clutched the bundle to her chest, the lantern flickered, throwing long shadows across the cabin walls. A gust of wind rattled the window, startling her. She turned, half expecting to see someone standing outside. The forest loomed, darkening as evening fell. A shiver traveled her spine. She was not sure if it was fear, grief, or the unsettling knowledge that this discovery was only the beginning. She blew out the lantern, the cabin falling into a hush broken only by the whisper of leaves outside. As she locked the door and stepped back into the cool twilight, her eyes lingered on the bundle of Richard's papers, now hidden beneath her arm. One line from his letter pulsed in her mind, "Even if Ethan does not yet understand." Margaret paused beside the car, clutching the envelope, staring back at the cabin that had offered her answers but raised even more questions. If Ethan ever learned of these properties, what would he do? Could he bear the truth, or would Marissa twist it into another weapon? She slid into the driver's seat, her breath trembling in the cold air, and whispered, "Richard, what am I supposed to do with this?" The forest gave no reply, only a long sigh through the pines. And then, just as she started the engine, her phone buzzed in the passenger seat. A message lit up the screen. It was from an unknown number. The words were short, chilling. "You think you're safe at Silver Creek? Think again." Margaret froze, her blood running cold, the glow of the screen burning against the dark. Who knew she was here? How could they know about Silver Creek? She sat in the driver's seat, the night closing in around her, the envelope heavy in her lap. One question clawed through her mind, louder than all the others. Had Richard's secrets been safe, or had someone else been waiting for her to find them? Margaret's hands trembled as she set the phone down, the glow of the message searing her vision long after the screen dimmed. The unknown number, the cutting words "think again" dug into her chest like claws. Her first thought was Ethan. Had he said something? No, His face in court had been confusion, fear, maybe regret, but not malice. Marissa. It had to be Marissa. She had always moved quickly, circling Margaret like a hawk, but how could she know about the cabin, about Silver Creek? Richard had guarded this place so carefully, as if it existed outside the world. Margaret sat in the driver's seat, frozen, her breath fogging the windshield. For a long moment, the only sound was the steady tick of the cooling engine. Then instinct stirred in her bones. She pressed the envelope and the bundle of Richard's notes against her chest, clutching them as though they were armor. She could not stay here. Whoever sent that message wanted to rattle her, maybe even scare her away. But the cabin was not a place of surrender, it was Richard's gift, his shield. She whispered under her breath, "You will not take this from me," though her voice cracked with fear. The drive back down the gravel road was cloaked in darkness, headlights cutting through the forest. Every branch seemed to bend closer, every shadow seemed to lean across her path. Margaret glanced often at the rearview mirror, half expecting headlights to appear, but none came. Still, her heart raced with the certainty that she was not alone. At the base of the road, her phone buzzed again. A second message, shorter than the first. "Leave it alone." By the time she reached her home in Brattleboro, the night pressed down heavy, the house looming like a sentinel in the streetlight glow. She parked quickly, gathered the documents into her bag, and hurried inside, locking the door behind her. The familiar creak of the hallway floorboards felt different now, not welcoming, but fragile, as though the safety of her house had been pierced. She placed the envelope on the kitchen table beside Richard's old notebook. The coffee stain caught the lamplight, steady and grounding. Margaret sank into the chair and stared at the words of the messages glowing on her phone. Fear curled in her chest, but anger rose too. For weeks she had endured humiliation, betrayal, manipulation. But this threatening her, haunting her steps to Silver Creek, this was a line too far. She pressed her hands flat against the table. Richard had prepared her for storms, and storms demanded resolve. The next morning she drove straight to Karen's office. The attorney greeted her with calm, though her eyes sharpened when Margaret slid the phone across the desk. Karen read the messages silently, then exhaled. "This is serious," she said, her voice firm. "You need to be cautious. Whoever sent this knows more than they should. But it also means something else they're afraid. If they want you to leave it alone, it means you've touched the truth." Margaret nodded, her throat tight. "Richard left more than I realized. There was a bundle of papers hidden at the cabin. Notes, deeds, letters, even one addressed to you." Karen's brows rose. "To me?" "Yes." Margaret pulled the bundle from her bag, laying it on the desk. Karen untied the twine carefully, her fingers lingering over Richard's handwriting. She read in silence, lips moving faintly, then looked up. "He trusted me with pieces of this puzzle, but he never told me he wrote directly to me. He must have known it would take both of us your strength, my knowledge to bring it to light." Margaret leaned forward, her voice low. "Karen, what am I really holding here? It's more than property, more than money. Why would someone go so far to scare me away?" Karen hesitated before answering. "Richard wasn't only preparing for your future, he was protecting a legacy. Some of these holdings are tied to community projects, investments meant to preserve land, to keep developers from swallowing Vermont piece by piece. If Marissa or anyone with greed got hold of this, they could dismantle it all. That's why it matters so much." Margaret felt her chest tighten with both pride and fear. Richard had not only cared for her, he had cared for the community, for roots that stretched beyond their family. She whispered, "He carried this alone for years. And now it's in your hands," Karen said gently. "But Margaret, you don't have to carry it alone anymore." The reassurance steadied her, yet the words of the messages still burned. Someone already knew. Someone was watching. That evening, Margaret returned home to find Dorothy waiting on her porch with a basket of fresh rolls. "Saw your lights on late last night," Dorothy said, her eyes searching. "You all right, Margaret?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded. "Just sorting things. Richard left more than I realized." Dorothy squeezed her hand warmly. "He was a good man. He'd want you to stand tall. And you're not alone. Not while I'm across the street." The comfort of those words wrapped around Margaret like a quilt, but as night fell again, she kept the curtains drawn, her nerves prickling at every sound outside. She reread Richard's letter before bed, tracing his words, "Do not let fear make you small." 2 days later, Ethan appeared at her door. His shoulders slumped, his eyes shadowed. He looked older, worn down. Margaret's instinct was to brace herself, but his voice surprised her. "Mom, I need to talk. Just me. No Marissa." She let him in, tension tight in her chest. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at his hands. "I don't know how much you know," he said quietly, "but things with Marissa, they're worse than you think. She's desperate, Mom. Debts, people calling at all hours. She told me if I don't get the house, we'll lose everything." Margaret swallowed hard, her heart aching. "Ethan, she's been using you, twisting you." "I know." His eyes lifted, red with shame. "I wanted to believe she loved me, but, Mom, I saw her phone last week. She's been talking to someone else. I think she's planning to leave as soon as she gets what she wants." Margaret's pulse quickened. "Ethan, did she ever mention Silver Creek?" He froze, confusion flickering across his face. "Silver Creek? No. Why?" Margaret hesitated, then slid her phone across the table, showing him the messages. Ethan's face drained of color. "That's not her number, I swear it. But she's been meeting people. Shady people. Maybe one of them knows." Fear chilled Margaret, but there was something else in Ethan's voice, truth. She saw the boy she once knew flickering beneath the man bent by betrayal. For the first time in months, he looked like her son again. Still, the mystery deepened. If not Marissa, then who had sent the messages? Who else knew Richard's secrets? That night, Margaret sat alone in the living room, Richard's notebook open in her lap. She whispered, "Richard, I'm trying. I'm holding on." The bonsai tree in the corner caught her eye, a new sprout curling upward in defiance of the season. She took it as a sign. Sleep came late, heavy with unease. She dreamed of Richard standing by the cabin, his hand raised in warning, his mouth forming words she could not hear. When she woke, the dawn light was gray and uncertain, and her phone buzzed once more. Another message. This one with an address. A warehouse on the edge of town. The words were blunt. "If you want answers, come alone." Margaret's hand shook as she held the phone, her pulse thundering in her ears. The decision loomed, heavy and dangerous. Was this a trap? Or was it the only chance to uncover the truth Richard had hidden so carefully? She looked at the bonsai again, its small leaves trembling in the morning draft. She whispered, "Richard, guide me." And then, with dread curling in her stomach, she asked herself the question that would not let her go. Who was waiting for her in that warehouse, and how much of Richard's legacy was already in their hands? Margaret stared at the message on her phone until the letters blurred. A warehouse on the edge of town. "If you want answers, come alone." The words pressed into her chest like the weight of a stone. Every instinct told her this was dangerous, that walking into a meeting with an unknown sender was reckless. But Richard's voice echoed in her mind, steady as ever. "Do not let fear make you small." She sat at the kitchen table with the bonsai nearby, its tiny leaves glowing faintly in the lamplight. She whispered to it, as if to Richard himself, "What would you have me do? Ignore it and let them keep their grip on Ethan? Or walk into the dark and hope to find the truth?" The tree, of course, gave no answer, but something about its stubborn sprout curving upward felt like a sign. Life bent, but it did not break. The following day passed in a blur. She tried to keep to routine coffee at dawn, sweeping the porch, reading Richard's notes again, but her mind returned constantly to the address. Fear gnawed at her, but so did curiosity. Whoever had sent those messages knew Silver Creek. That knowledge was too sharp, too specific, to ignore. By late afternoon, Margaret made her choice. She slipped Richard's letter into her cardigan pocket, tucked the bundle of documents into her bag, and drove toward the edge of town. The sky darkened early, clouds smothering the light, as if the world itself conspired to make the evening heavier. The warehouse district sprawled like a forgotten skeleton, rows of corrugated metal buildings with broken windows and rusted doors. Her headlights caught the number painted faintly on the side of one building, the very address from the message. Margaret parked a block away, heart pounding, and sat still for a moment. She wanted to call Karen, to tell her where she was, but the message had been clear. "Come alone." And something inside her, equal parts fear and pride, insisted she could do this herself. She approached on foot, gravel crunching under her shoes. The warehouse loomed, its sliding door cracked open just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness inside. Margaret swallowed hard and stepped through. The air smelled of oil and dust, the kind of stale silence that hangs over abandoned places. Shadows stretched long across the concrete floor. For a moment, the emptiness pressed on her, and she wondered if she had walked into nothing more than her own paranoia. Then a voice echoed from the far side. "You came." Margaret's breath caught. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward. A man in his late 50s, his suit worn at the cuffs, his face lined with years of strain. He carried no weapon, only a folder tucked under his arm. "Who are you?" Margaret asked, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "My name's Alan Price," he said. "I worked with Richard years ago. Real estate, community projects, things he didn't always talk about openly. He trusted me to watch over certain files. And when I heard what was happening, your son, his wife, the threats, I knew it was time." Margaret narrowed her eyes. "You sent the messages?" He shook his head. "No. Someone else got to you first. I only learned you went to Silver Creek because, well, word travels in small towns. But I wouldn't threaten you. I'd warn you." Her pulse quickened. "Then who would? Who knows about the cabin?" Price's expression darkened. "Developers, predatory ones, the kind Richard spent half his life fighting. He blocked their projects more than once, buying land before they could, tying up permits in red tape. He won battles, but he made enemies, powerful ones. And now they see an opening with him gone, with your son tangled up, with Marissa whispering in his ear." Margaret's knees weakened, but she steadied herself. "So Silver Creek, the properties, the foundation he dreamed of, they're all targets." "Yes." Price set the folder on a dusty table between them, but he left tools, records, proof of what these men did in the past. Fraud, illegal lobbying, the kind of things that could ruin them if brought into light. He wanted you to decide if the fight was worth carrying on. Margaret stared at the folder, its edges frayed. Fear rippled through her, but beneath it, a thread of resolve tightened. She whispered, "He always carried more than I knew, and now it's mine." Price nodded. "But know this, Margaret, if they sent you threats, they're watching. They won't hesitate to use Ethan to get what they want. Be careful." She clutched Richard's letter in her pocket, the words a shield against the chill. "I will not let them destroy what he built." Price's gaze softened. "Then you'll need allies. More than me, more than Karen. People who will stand beside you when this turns ugly, because it will." Margaret gathered the folder into her arms. The paper felt heavier than stone. She left the warehouse without looking back, her breath sharp in the night air. Every step felt like stepping deeper into Richard's world, a world of battles fought quietly, victories hidden, enemies waiting. On the drive home, her headlights sliced through the dark, and she caught herself glancing at every car that passed, every figure at the corner. By the time she pulled into her driveway, her shoulders ached with tension. She hurried inside, locking the door, setting both folders, Richard's and Price's, on the table. She sat for hours, reading. Each page revealed more of Richard's battles. Names of corporations, lobbyists, developers with ties to money that flowed like poison. Notes in Richard's hand. "Protect the watershed. Community first. They will not win." Margaret's chest swelled with pride and fear in equal measure. He had not been fighting only for her, or for Ethan, he had been fighting for Vermont itself. But one page made her freeze. At the bottom, in Richard's careful handwriting, were the words, "If something happens, watch Marissa. She is not who she pretends to be." Margaret's blood ran cold. Richard had known. Somehow, he had seen it before she did. Her hands trembled as she set the paper down. She whispered into the stillness, "How much did you know, Richard? How far ahead did you see?" Outside, the wind rattled the window, and Margaret glanced up sharply. For a moment, she swore she saw movement near the street lamp, a figure standing too still, watching. She blinked, and the space was empty. But the chill lingered. That night, she hid the folders beneath the floorboards of her bedroom, just as Richard once hid his secrets. She lay awake long after midnight, listening to the house creak, her mind replaying the words, "She is not who she pretends to be." When sleep finally came, it was restless, haunted by the image of Marissa's smile, sharp, cold, hungry. By morning, Margaret rose with a new resolve. She could not shield Ethan by silence. She had to show him, piece by piece, who his wife really was and what his father had left behind. But how? If she pushed too hard, Marissa would twist it again, using Ethan's guilt to bind him tighter. Margaret brewed coffee and sat at the table, tracing the rim of her cup. She whispered to the empty room, "Guide me, Richard. Tell me when to speak and when to hold silence." Her phone buzzed, pulling her back. A new message. This one not from Price, not from a stranger, but from Ethan. "Mom, I need to see you. Alone. Tonight." Margaret's heart pounded. She typed back quickly, "Come after work. The porch light will be on." She set the phone down and pressed her hands flat against the table. Tonight, then. Tonight her son would walk through the door, carrying his shame, his fear, maybe his last shred of hope. And she would have to decide how much truth to lay before him. The day stretched long, heavy with anticipation. Margaret cleaned the house more than it needed, swept the porch twice, baked bread just to steady her hands. As the sun dipped low, she lit a lamp by the window, the same lamp Richard once used when waiting for Ethan to come home late as a teenager. When the knock finally came, her chest tightened. She opened the door to find Ethan standing there, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. "Mom," he whispered, "I don't know where else to go." Margaret stepped aside, her heart aching, and let him in. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around the mug of coffee Margaret placed in front of him. He didn't drink. He just stared at the steam curling upward, his shoulders heavy with a silence that seemed to press against the walls. Margaret sat opposite, her own fingers tight around Richard's notebook beneath the table, as if the leather-bound pages could lend her strength. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Ethan whispered, "I think I've made a terrible mistake." Margaret's chest ached. She reached across the table, her hand hovering just above his. "You're here. That's what matters. Tell me, Ethan." His eyes flickered up, filled with both fear and shame. "Marissa's been lying to me. I didn't want to see it, but I can't ignore it anymore. She said the house was just about security, about making sure you'd be cared for. But I saw messages, Mom. She's been in contact with people, men I've never heard of. I confronted her once, and she said I was imagining things. But last night, I saw her meeting one of them in town. They didn't see me. But the way she laughed, the way she touched his arm," his voice broke. "She's not with me. She's using me." Margaret closed her eyes. The truth Richard had written in his notes pulsed in her memory. She is not who she pretends to be. Slowly, she opened the drawer beside her and pulled out one of the folders Price had given her. She laid it on the table. "Ethan," she said softly, "your father saw this long before you did. He left me these papers. He knew Marissa wasn't what she pretended to be." Ethan's eyes widened as he reached for the folder. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, scanning Richard's notes, the deeds, the records. "Dad, he knew? He left all this and you never told me?" Margaret's throat tightened. "I wanted to protect you. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I bore the weight myself, you wouldn't have to see what she was doing. But silence doesn't protect, Ethan. It only delays the pain." He buried his face in his hands. "God, Mom, I let her turn me against you. I stood by while she talked about selling the house, about treating you like a burden, and I let her." Margaret reached out, resting her hand gently on his arm. "You are my son. You were blind, but you are not lost." For the first time in months, he leaned into her touch, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Margaret's eyes stung, but she held herself steady. Richard's words echoed again. Even if Ethan does not yet understand, now perhaps he finally did. When Ethan lifted his head, his face was pale but resolved. "Mom, I want to help. I don't care what it takes. Tell me what I have to do." Margaret hesitated. She had prayed for this moment for her son to see the truth, but she also knew the danger. "Ethan, this isn't just about Marissa. There are others. Developers, powerful men, people your father spent years fighting. They've already threatened me. They're watching us." He stiffened. Threatened you? How? She showed him the messages on her phone. His jaw tightened as he read. This isn't just Marissa. She's tied herself to someone else. Someone dangerous. Margaret nodded. And now they want me to surrender. But I can't. Not when Richard worked so hard, not when our future depends on it. Ethan pushed the folder back toward her. Then we fight. Together. I'll stand with you, Mom. I won't let them tear us apart. Her heart swelled, fragile yet fierce. For the first time, she felt she was not standing alone, but as quickly as hope flared, fear shadowed it. If you defy Marissa, she'll come after you. She won't let you go easily. Ethan's mouth hardened. Then let her try. They sat in silence for a while, the lamp casting a warm glow over the kitchen. For a fleeting moment, it felt like family again the way it had when Richard was alive, when Ethan was still a boy. Margaret dared to breathe in the peace, knowing it might not last. Later that night, after Ethan had gone back to his apartment to gather his things, Margaret paced the hallway, restless. She checked the locks twice, then again. She pulled the folders from beneath the floorboards, spreading the documents across the dining table. She traced Richard's handwriting, his careful notes, his warnings. She whispered, "We're not beaten yet." The house was quiet, too quiet. She poured herself tea and settled by the window, watching the street. Midnight passed, 1 o'clock, 2. She fought sleep, the folders still open beside her. And then she heard it. A faint sound at the back door, the scrape of metal against the lock. Margaret froze, her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she reached for the phone but stopped. If she dialed, the sound might alert whoever was outside. She listened, heart pounding. The scrape came again, louder this time, followed by the faint creak of the door frame. Someone was trying to get in. She glanced at the table, at the folders spread across it. If they were after the documents, she couldn't let them find them. Quickly, she gathered the papers into Richard's notebook and slipped it into the laundry chute that dropped into the basement. Her hands shook, but her movements were swift. Then she turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The back door creaked open. A sliver of cold air slipped into the house. Margaret pressed herself against the wall, her breath shallow, listening to the slow steps entering her kitchen. A shadow moved across the faint moonlight spilling through the window, tall, broad-shouldered, silent. Margaret's heart hammered as the intruder paused at the table, as if searching. Papers were gone. She had hidden them just in time. The figure shifted, moving toward the hallway, toward her. She pressed back harder against the wall, praying he would not see her in the shadows. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her pocket, loud in the silence. The figure froze. Margaret's blood turned to ice. The man turned his head slowly toward her. She couldn't see his face, only the glint of eyes catching the faint light. He stepped closer. Margaret clutched the edge of the wall, every instinct screaming at her to run, but her legs rooted to the floor. The figure stopped just a few feet away. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then, in a voice low and rough, he whispered, "It's not yours to keep." Before she could react, he turned and slipped back through the door, vanishing into the night as swiftly as he had come. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret stood frozen, her chest heaving. She fumbled for the phone in her pocket. A new message had arrived, not from Ethan, not from Karen, from the same unknown number as before. "Next time, you won't be alone in the dark." Margaret locked the door with shaking hands, then sank into the chair, clutching Richard's notebook retrieved from the basement. Her heart still pounded, but beneath the fear, determination burned. They wanted her to give up. They wanted her to be small. She pressed her palm to the notebook, whispering, "I will not let you down, Richard." But the question clawed at her as the night stretched on. Who was the man in her kitchen, and what would happen when next time finally came? The night after the break-in stretched on like a wound that refused to close. Margaret barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the silhouette in her kitchen, heard the low rasp of his words, "It's not yours to keep." She kept Richard's notebook under her pillow, the leather cool against her cheek, as if the weight of it might keep her safe. By dawn, exhaustion pulled at her bones, but she forced herself up. The house felt strange, violated. She checked every lock twice, every window latch 3 times. Duke barked across the street, and Linda waved from her porch, concern etched into her face. Margaret raised a hand in reply, but the gesture felt hollow. She didn't want to worry Linda with the truth not yet. Instead, she drove straight to Karen's office. The February wind bit through her coat as she hurried up the stone steps. Karen's assistant ushered her in quickly, sensing her urgency. Karen looked up from her desk, her calm demeanor cracking as she saw Margaret's pale face. "What happened?" Margaret set the notebook on the desk. Her voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. "Someone broke into my house last night. They were searching for this. I hid it in the basement just in time." Karen's expression hardened. "Did you see them?" "A man. Tall, broad. I couldn't see his face, but he knew what he was after." Margaret pulled out her phone, showing the latest message. "Next time, you won't be alone in the dark." Karen leaned back, exhaling slowly. "This confirms it. They're escalating. Whoever's behind Marissa has money, power, and men willing to step into your kitchen. Margaret, this is beyond family now. It's organized." Margaret rubbed her temples. "I thought about calling the police, but what do I say? That a man broke in and whispered threats? They'll dismiss me as an old woman rattled by shadows." "You're not wrong," Karen admitted. "But even if they took it seriously, I'm not sure the police could help. Developers like these people Richard fought, they have ties, Margaret. Money moves quietly. Cases get buried." The weight of helplessness pressed on her chest, but Margaret refused to bow. "Then what do we do?" Karen opened the notebook, flipping through Richard's careful notes. "We get ahead of them. We find what Richard left behind, the leverage he meant for us to use. Once it's in the open, they can't silence you without exposing themselves." Margaret's throat tightened. "And Ethan?" Karen's gaze softened. "He has to choose. If he stands with you, he becomes a target too. But he's your son. He deserves the truth." Margaret thought of Ethan's haunted face the night before, his whisper, "I think I've made a terrible mistake." She nodded slowly. "He's beginning to see. Last night, for the first time in months, he looked like my boy again." Karen closed the notebook carefully. "Then let's give him something real to hold on to. Meet me tonight at my cabin. Bring Ethan. There's something I want to show you both, something Richard entrusted to me years ago, but we'll need to be cautious." Margaret agreed, though dread stirred in her stomach. Each step forward felt like walking deeper into a storm. That afternoon she tried to rest, but the house felt hostile. Every creak made her flinch, every shadow stretched too long. Finally, she sat at the dining table with Richard's papers spread before her. She traced his handwriting, forcing herself to read through the dense records. Most were land deeds and financial notes, but one page caught her eye, a list of names, written in Richard's neat script. North Star Development, Aegis Capital, Latham and Rowe. Beside each name, he had scribbled warnings, fraud investigations, tied to zoning scandal, bribed council member Burlington, 2009. Margaret's heart pounded. These weren't random. These were the enemies Richard had fought. And at the bottom of the page, underlined twice, were two words: still active. Her hands shook as she folded the page back into the notebook. This wasn't just about her house. Marissa and her backers wanted more. They wanted control over Richard's entire legacy. As the sun set, Margaret lit the porch lamp and waited for Ethan. The street was quiet, the kind of Vermont stillness that usually comforted her. Tonight, it felt like the pause before thunder. When Ethan arrived, his eyes were tired but determined. He carried a small duffel bag, as if ready for exile. Margaret hugged him tightly, then pulled back. "We're going to Karen's. She says she has something to show us." On the drive, Ethan was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "Mom, if I'd seen those papers earlier, if I'd listened to Dad more, maybe we wouldn't be here." Margaret reached over, squeezing his hand. "We can't live in the maybes, Ethan. We live in what we do now." They arrived at Karen's cabin after dark. The porch light glowed faintly through the trees. Karen opened the door quickly, ushering them inside. The warmth of the wood stove wrapped around them, but tension crackled in the air. "Good, you came," Karen said, her voice low. She set a wooden box on the table, older than any file Margaret had seen. This was Richard's. He gave it to me a year before he passed. He said, "Keep it sealed until Margaret is ready." I think that time is now. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for the box. The latch creaked as she lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of envelopes, each marked with Richard's handwriting. Some bore dates, others only names. One envelope sat on top, labeled simply, "For Ethan." Margaret and Ethan exchanged a look. His throat bobbed as he reached for it, his fingers shaking. He opened it slowly, pulling out a letter. His father's handwriting filled the page. Ethan read aloud, voice breaking, "My son, if you are reading this, it means your mother has faced storms I wish she would never face. You are a man now, but you are still my boy. Remember, strength is not in power, but in loyalty to what is right. Do not let love blind you to truth, and do not let fear chain you to those who use you. Stand by your mother. Protect her. Protect what we built." Ethan's voice faltered. He pressed the letter to his chest, tears spilling down his cheeks. Margaret reached for him, and he clung to her, sobbing. Karen looked away politely, giving them the moment. When Ethan finally pulled back, his face was streaked with tears, but his eyes burned with something new resolve. "Mom, I'll fight with you, whatever it takes." Margaret nodded, her heart swelling with both grief and hope. Richard had spoken from beyond the grave, and his words had reached their son in a way she could not. But as she looked back into the box, at the envelopes marked with names she didn't yet recognize, a chill prickled her spine. If Richard had left so many warnings, how deep did this battle go? Margaret's fingers lingered on the edges of the wooden box as if it might vanish the moment she looked away. The fire in Karen's stove crackled, shadows leaping across the cabin walls, wrapping the three of them in a cocoon of both warmth and unease. Ethan wiped his eyes, the letter from his father still clutched in his hand. He knew, Mom. He knew Marissa wasn't what she seemed. He saw through her even when I didn't. His voice hardened, rough with guilt. "I feel like I've been sleepwalking, letting her lead me around while she planned all of this." Margaret touched his shoulder. "You woke up, Ethan. That's what matters now." Karen leaned forward, drawing another envelope from the box. This one bore the name Latham and Rowe in Richard's bold script. She slid it across the table. "This will explain more about the enemies your father faced." Margaret opened it carefully. Inside were clippings from old newspapers, copies of city council minutes, handwritten notes from Richard detailing zoning disputes, community protests, and suspicious campaign donations. At the bottom of one page, Richard had written in red ink, "Follow the money, it always leads back." Karen tapped the words. "Your husband wasn't just saving your home, Margaret. He was protecting Burlington, protecting Vermont. If Latham and Rowe or their affiliates gain control of his holdings, they can bulldoze farmland, reroute rivers, pave over entire neighborhoods. That's what they've been waiting for." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. "And Marissa is tangled up with them?" "I don't know how deeply," Karen admitted, "but she's in contact with someone tied to their circle. Alan Price suspected it, and Richard warned it in his notes." Margaret folded the papers back into the envelope, her pulse hammering. "So this isn't just about me. It's about everything Richard tried to protect." Karen nodded. "Exactly. And that's why they won't stop with intimidation. They'll escalate until you're too frightened to resist, or until they have leverage so heavy you can't fight." The cabin fell silent, the weight of the truth pressing down. Margaret looked at her son. "Ethan, you said Marissa has debts. Do you know to whom?" His jaw clenched. She always dodged the details. Credit cards, failed business ventures, people she called investors. She told me if I asked too much, I didn't trust her. And like a fool, I let it drop. He buried his face in his hands again. "God, Mom, she could have tied us to criminals for all I know." Karen's tone softened. "It's not too late. We still have the documents. If we move quickly, we can build a case, show the court that Marissa is unfit, that these developers are predatory. But we'll need proof that ties her to them directly." Margaret's stomach nodded. Proof. The word echoed in her mind like a bell. Somewhere in Richard's careful scrawl, in these envelopes, in his old files, there had to be a thread they could pull. She whispered, "Where do we start?" Karen answered by pulling out yet another envelope. This one bore no name, only the word hidden. Inside was a single slip of paper with a safety deposit box number and a key taped to it. Margaret's breath caught. "A bank box?" Karen nodded. Richard must have placed something there, something he didn't trust to leave in anyone's hands. If it's what I think it is, it could be the evidence we need." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Then we go tomorrow. Together." Margaret gripped the key, its cold metal pressing into her palm. A flicker of fear passed through her. If she and Ethan had it now, others would know soon enough. She could almost hear Richard's voice. "Be cautious. Not all battles are fought in the open." That night, back at her house, Margaret lay awake long past midnight. Ethan slept in his old room upstairs, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of how fragile their alliance still was. She stared at the ceiling, the shadows shifting with each gust of wind outside, and wondered what they would find in that box. By morning, resolve hardened. She brewed strong coffee, dressed in her warmest coat, and tucked the key safely into her purse. Ethan came down with tired eyes but a steady expression. "Ready?" Margaret nodded. "Ready." The drive to the bank felt like moving through a dream. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, snowflakes beginning to fall. Ethan kept glancing in the mirrors, tense. "I don't like how quiet it feels," he muttered. Margaret tried to steady him. "Your father always said silence is when you listen closest. Maybe that's what we need now." When they arrived, Karen was already waiting, her coat buttoned tight, her expression set. They entered together, the warmth of the lobby a sharp contrast to the icy air outside. Margaret approached the clerk, handed over the key, and signed the log. Her hands shook slightly as she did. The clerk led them to the private room where boxes could be opened. Margaret slid the small key into the lock, the click echoing in the silence. Her heart pounded as she lifted the lid. Inside was a leather-bound binder, worn and thick. Margaret opened it with trembling hands. Pages upon pages of financial records, contracts, photographs, even typed memos. And at the very front, a letter. "Margaret, if you have found this, it means the fight has reached you. These are the records of every deal I uncovered, every false signature, every bribe. I could not expose them while alive without risking you and Ethan. But now it is yours. Use it wisely. Trust only those who have proven their loyalty." Ethan leaned over her shoulder, his eyes widening. This is everything. Names, numbers, even photographs. Mom, this could destroy them." Karen's face was grave. "Which is exactly why they're coming for you. With this binder, you're no longer just defending yourself. You're holding a weapon." Margaret's stomach twisted. The weight of the binder felt like lead in her hands. She whispered, "Richard, what have you left me?" Before Karen could answer, Ethan stiffened. "Mom, look." Through the small window of the private room, a man in a dark coat stood near the lobby doors, watching them. Margaret's blood ran cold. The man wasn't moving, wasn't pretending to browse paperwork like the others. He was waiting. Karen lowered her voice. "We can't leave through the front. Not with him there." Margaret clutched the binder to her chest. "Then how?" Karen glanced toward the side hall. "There's a staff exit near the vault. We'll have to move quickly." Margaret's heart pounded as they gathered their things. The fight Richard had carried in silence was now roaring into the open, and she could feel the storm bearing down. Margaret held the binder so tightly her knuckles whitened. Every instinct told her to run, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. Ethan's hand hovered near her shoulder as if ready to shield her, while Karen's sharp eyes scanned the hall. "Stay close," Karen whispered. She led them through the side corridor, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The hallway smelled faintly of paper and dust, lined with doors leading to records rooms. Margaret's heart hammered, each step echoing like a drumbeat. They reached the end where a heavy steel door bore a discreet staff-only sign. Karen pressed the bar, and the door gave way to a dim stairwell. The cold air smelled of concrete and old paint. They descended quickly, their footsteps hollow in the stairwell. At the bottom, a plain metal door opened onto a narrow alley. Snowflakes drifted down, settling on Margaret's coat. She tightened her grip on the binder. For one breathless moment, she thought they had slipped away unseen. Then Ethan hissed, "Mom, look." At the far end of the alley, a figure stepped into view, the same man in the dark coat from the bank lobby. His face was shadowed, but his stance radiated intent. He didn't move closer, only stood with his hands in his pockets, watching. Karen touched Margaret's elbow. "Keep walking. Don't run. Running gives him power." They moved down the alley, the man's gaze burning into them. Margaret's pulse roared in her ears. Each step felt heavier, the binder like an anchor against her chest. When they reached the street, Karen raised her hand and hailed a cab. The man in the alley remained still, but Margaret felt the weight of his eyes long after the cab door shut behind them. Back at Margaret's house, the three gathered around the dining table. The binder lay between them, its leather worn and scarred. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low. "Mom, this is dangerous. They know we have it now." Margaret smoothed her trembling hands across the cover. "Richard didn't hide this so we could keep it buried. He wanted it used." Karen nodded. "But carefully. If we dump everything at once, they'll spin it, bury it, discredit you. We need strategy. A leak here, a name there. Build momentum. Turn their power against them piece by piece." Margaret felt exhaustion seep into her bones, but resolve burned stronger. "Then we'll do it. For Richard, for Ethan, for this town." Ethan's eyes softened. "For family." For a fleeting moment, hope hung between them like fragile glass. But the night brought no peace. After Ethan went upstairs to sleep, Margaret sat alone in the kitchen. She flipped through the binder again, tracing Richard's notes, the photographs paperclipped to the pages, smiling developers shaking hands with council members, checks signed in back rooms, land surveys altered with false signatures. She paused at one photograph. Marissa, seated at a restaurant table with a man she didn't recognize. Her smile was sharp, triumphant. Richard's scrawl beneath it read, "Unknown partner. Watch her." Margaret's stomach dropped. Proof. Richard had known even then that Marissa was not just ambitious, she was connected. Her phone buzzed. A new message lit the screen. Not from Ethan, not from Karen. From the same unknown number. "We warned you. Next, we won't knock." Margaret's breath caught. Her eyes darted toward the darkened windows, her pulse racing. She typed a reply before fear could stop her. "Who are you? What do you want?" For a long moment, no answer came. Then the screen lit again. "You already have what we want." Richard knew it. "Now give it back before it buries you too." Her hands shook as she set the phone down. The binder loomed on the table, heavy with secrets. She whispered into the silence, "Richard, what storm have you left me in?" Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Margaret stiffened. Ethan was asleep, she was certain of it. Slowly, she rose from her chair, listening. Another creak, closer this time. Her phone buzzed again. One final message. "Check your porch." Heart pounding, Margaret moved to the front door. She hesitated, then slowly opened it. The night air rushed in, cold against her skin. At her feet lay a small envelope, plain, unmarked. She bent, picked it up, and stepped back inside quickly, bolting the door. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Ethan, her son, walking beside Marissa. The photo was recent, taken only days ago, but Ethan's expression was blank, distant, while Marissa's smile glowed with satisfaction. On the back, in red ink, were 3 words that chilled Margaret's blood. "He is ours." Margaret sank into her chair, the photograph clutched in her shaking hands. Fear clawed at her throat, but so did rage. They weren't just threatening her, they were staking a claim on her son, dragging him back into their grip even as he tried to break free. She whispered fiercely, "No, not again. Not my son." But the question burned through her as the clock struck midnight. How far would they go to reclaim Ethan, and what would she have to sacrifice to save him? The photograph lay on the kitchen table, its edges curling slightly under the lamplight. Margaret stared at it as though the paper itself might bite. Ethan's blank expression haunted her, so unlike the boy she had raised. Marissa's smile glowed with triumph, as if the camera had captured not just an image but her victory. And on the back, those words scrawled in red ink, "He is ours." Her fingers trembled as she traced the letters. The phrase looped endlessly in her mind, wrapping around her chest like a noose. Ours. Not hers. Not Richard's. Theirs. Whoever they were. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Margaret clenched the photo in her fist, her heart hammering. She moved to the bottom of the stairs. "Ethan," she called softly. A moment later, her son appeared, sleepy-eyed, hair rumpled. He frowned when he saw her pale face. "Mom? What is it?" Margaret held out the photo with shaking hands. Ethan took it, studied it, and his expression shifted from confusion to horror. "Where did you get this?" "It was left on the porch," Margaret whispered, "with a message." She turned it over, showing him the red scrawl. Ethan's jaw tightened. "This isn't true. I haven't spoken to her since I left. I swear it." Margaret wanted to believe him, but the doubt clawed at her. "Then when was this taken?" "I don't know," Ethan said, his voice rising with desperation. "Maybe before I left her. Maybe staged. She's manipulative, Mom. She'll do anything to twist the knife." Margaret's throat burned with both fear and relief. She touched his cheek gently. "I want to believe you, but they're trying to drive us apart. Don't let them win, Ethan." He nodded, eyes bright with guilt. "I won't." The next morning, Karen arrived at the house. Margaret showed her the photograph. Karen studied it closely, her lips pressed thin. "This is meant to destabilize you, but it's also proof. Whoever took it was close enough to know Marissa's movements. We could use it." Margaret shook her head. "Use it against my own son?" "Against his wife, yes. But if I drag Ethan through this publicly, I could lose him again." Karen's gaze softened. "You're trying to protect him. But Margaret, they won't hesitate to use him as a pawn. If you don't get ahead of it, they will." Margaret pressed the photo flat against the table. "Not yet. Not like this." That evening, Ethan returned from a walk downtown, tension in his shoulders. "I heard something," he said as he closed the door behind him. "Marissa's meeting someone tomorrow night. A dinner at the Granite Room. It's private, invitation only. She told a friend it's about closing the deal." Karen's eyes sharpened. "The Granite Room is where North Star Development hosts its events. If she's meeting them, that's confirmation." Margaret's pulse quickened. "Then we need to see for ourselves." "Careful," Karen warned. "If they catch you, they'll spin it as paranoia, an old woman trespassing." But Margaret's resolve was already solidifying. "I've been called worse. Richard didn't build this fight for me to stay silent." The next night, the three of them parked 2 blocks from the Granite Room. The restaurant gleamed like a jewel in the cold Vermont night, its tall windows glowing with golden light. Expensive cars lined the curb. Suited men and women strode through the doors, their laughter sharp against the quiet street. Margaret pulled her scarf tighter around her face. She and Ethan slipped into the alley beside the building, where a side window overlooked one of the private dining rooms. Karen stayed in the car, ready to drive if they had to run. Through the glass, Margaret saw her. Marissa, radiant in a crimson dress, seated beside a man she didn't recognize. His suit was dark, his hair slicked back, his posture commanding. The air in the room seemed to bend around him. He leaned toward Marissa, speaking low. She laughed, tossing her hair back, her hand brushing his arm with deliberate intimacy. Margaret's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed a storm inside, to drag Ethan's wife out by the wrist to shout the truth. But she forced herself still, clutching Ethan's hand instead. His face was pale, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the woman he had once loved. The man raised a glass, and Marissa did the same. Their smiles gleamed in the candlelight. Around them, developers and investors watched with approval, as though welcoming her into their fold. Margaret leaned close to Ethan, her whisper sharp. "Do you see now? She was never yours. She was theirs from the start." Ethan's hand tightened painfully around hers. "I see." His voice cracked, but there was steel in it. "And I'll never let her drag me back again." They stayed long enough to watch Marissa slide a folder across the table. The dark-suited man opened it, nodded, and shook her hand. The deal was sealed. Margaret felt the weight of it in her bones. But then the door to the dining room opened, and a waiter stepped out. He glanced toward the window, his eyes narrowing as if he'd spotted movement. Margaret pulled Ethan down quickly, crouching in the shadows. Her heart pounded as footsteps approached the window. She pressed her back against the cold brick, praying the waiter would dismiss it as nothing. For a long moment, silence stretched. Then the footsteps retreated, the door closing again. Margaret exhaled shakily. "We can't stay. If they see us—" Ethan nodded, helping her up. "Let's go." They slipped back to the car, where Karen's anxious face waited behind the wheel. "Well?" Margaret's voice was grim. "She's in deeper than we thought, and she's not hiding anymore." The ride back from the granite room was silent, broken only by the hiss of the heater and the crunch of tires over icy streets. Margaret sat in the back seat, clutching Richard's binder against her chest as if it were a heartbeat. Ethan sat beside her, staring out the window, his reflection pale and gaunt in the glass. Finally he spoke, his voice ragged. I watched her smile at him the same way she used to smile at me. It's like she was rehearsing for this moment all along. I was just practice. Margaret reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "No, Ethan, you were never practice. You were her mask, her cover. She used you, yes, but that doesn't erase who you are, or the man your father wanted you to be." Ethan swallowed hard, his hand tightening around hers. "I feel sick, Mom, angry, ashamed, all at once, but mostly, I want to make sure she never wins." Karen kept her eyes on the road, her tone firm. "Then that anger has to become strategy. You can't let rage make you reckless. We'll use what we saw tonight, but carefully. These men don't just play with money, they play with power, and power demands blood when it's challenged." Margaret shivered at the truth in Karen's words. She thought of Richard's notes, of the photograph left on her porch, of the man in her kitchen whispering threats. The fight was no longer looming, it was here, in their bones, in their nights without rest. Back at the house, Margaret spread the binder across the dining table once more. Ethan leaned over the pages, scanning each photograph and memo with renewed urgency. His voice steadied as he read aloud. "North Star Development, Latham and Rowe, Aegis Capital, they're all here. Dad was tracking them for years." Margaret pointed to one margin note, written in Richard's sharp hand. "Granite room meetings, laundering front." Her breath caught. He knew that place was their stage long before Marissa joined them. Karen tapped the page. "That makes what we saw tonight even stronger. It ties Richard's suspicions directly to Marissa's actions. If we can match her presence with these records, we'll have leverage." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Leverage isn't enough. We need to expose them." Margaret looked at him, seeing in his face both the boy who once idolized his father and the man now forged by betrayal. Exposing them means risk. Once this binder goes public, we'll be targets. He met her eyes without flinching. "We already are." The clock chimed midnight, its sound echoing through the house. Margaret closed the binder gently, her hands lingering on the cover. She felt Richard's presence, steady as ever, urging her forward. Later, when Ethan had gone upstairs to sleep and Karen had left for the night, Margaret remained at the table, staring at the shadows stretching across the walls. She thought of the photograph, "He is ours," and shivered. She had her son back, but for how long? The battle was tightening around them like a noose. Just as she began to clear the table, her phone buzzed. She froze, dread curling in her stomach. The screen glowed with an unknown number. For a moment she considered ignoring it, but curiosity pushed her thumb across the screen. "Hello?" she whispered. A voice crackled through the line, low and urgent. "Margaret Whitmore?" "Yes," she said cautiously. "I don't have much time. I can't give my name. But I'm not on their side, not anymore. What they're planning, it's bigger than you know, and if you don't move first, you'll lose everything." Margaret's breath quickened. "Who are you? How do I know you're telling the truth?" "You don't," the voice replied. "But I can prove it. Check the old post office box your husband used, number 314. Tomorrow morning, you'll find what you need." Her grip tightened on the phone. "Why are you helping me?" There was a pause, then a strained whisper. "Because I made a mistake once, the same mistake your son made. I trusted them, and it cost me everything." Before she could ask more, the line went dead. Margaret sat frozen, the phone buzzing faintly in her palm. Her heart pounded with both fear and hope. A stranger had just thrown her another thread in Richard's tangled web, but was it salvation or another trap? The next morning, Margaret stood at the window, the photograph still lying on the table, Richard's binder beside it. Snow fell silently outside, blanketing the street in deceptive peace. Upstairs, Ethan slept fitfully. Across town, Marissa plotted her next move. and somewhere, a stranger waited for Margaret to claim whatever secret had been left in box 314. She pressed her palm against the glass, whispering to the empty air, "Richard, guide me, because I don't know if I'm walking into truth or into ruin." The question clawed at her as the snow thickened. Who was the mysterious caller, and what awaited her in that post office box? The snow still fell in soft veils the next morning when Margaret buttoned her wool coat and slipped Richard's notebook into her purse. Ethan met her by the door, his face pale from another night of restless dreams. "You really think this isn't a trap?" he asked, pulling on his gloves. Margaret hesitated, her hand on the knob. "I don't know, but your father always said when someone offers you a thread, you follow it. Even if it leads into darkness, you tug until the knot reveals itself." They drove through Burlington's quiet streets, the Buick's heater struggling against the chill. The post office sat at the corner of Main and South Union, its red brick facade half buried under drifts of snow. Margaret had walked through those doors 100 times in her life, but today they loomed like the gates to another world. Inside, the air smelled of paper and ink, the hum of sorting machines vibrating faintly through the floor. Margaret's steps echoed as she and Ethan walked past rows of brass-faced boxes. Her fingers trailed lightly over the small locks until she found it, 314. Her pulse quickened as she slipped the old key into the slot. It turned with a stiff click, and the door swung open. Inside lay a manila envelope, thick and weighty, and a small black USB drive taped to the flap. Margaret drew them out, her hands trembling. "What's in it?" Ethan whispered. Margaret untied the string, pulling the flap open. Inside were photographs, contracts, and a sheet of paper with Richard's familiar handwriting. "If you are reading this, Margaret, you have reached the part I could not carry alone. The documents here expose connections, money trails from North Star, from Latham and Rowe, from men who believe Vermont is for sale. Protect Ethan from them, and trust only those who prove themselves in sacrifice." Her breath caught. The phrase "prove themselves in sacrifice" echoed sharply. Was the anonymous caller one of those Richard had once trusted, now paying the price? Ethan leaned closer, his voice tight. "This is dynamite, Mom. These names, these signatures, they tie Marissa's new friends directly to bribery. This could destroy them in court." Margaret tucked the envelope into her bag. "Then we don't waste it." But as they left the building, Margaret sensed it, the shift in the air, the weight of unseen eyes. A black SUV idled at the corner, its windows darkened. The engine purred even though no snow clung to its hood, as if it had been waiting. Ethan noticed too. "Mom, get in the car. Now." They hurried back to the Buick, starting the engine quickly. The SUV pulled out a moment later, slipping behind them like a shadow. Margaret gripped the wheel tighter, her knuckles white. "They know," she whispered. "They know we took it." Ethan turned in his seat, his jaw tight. "Then let them follow. They won't scare us off." But Margaret's chest constricted as the SUV trailed them through 2 turns, then a third. Only when she pulled into Linda's driveway across from her own house did the vehicle glide past, vanishing into the swirl of snow. She sat for a long moment, her breath ragged. Ethan touched her arm gently. "We're okay. They didn't stop us." Margaret shook her head. "Not today. But they wanted us to know. They wanted us to feel the leash tightening." Inside, Margaret spread the documents across the table. Karen arrived within the hour, shaking snow from her coat, her eyes sharpening as she saw the evidence. She scanned the papers quickly, then the USB. This is enough to open an investigation, maybe even federal. But Margaret, once this goes forward, there's no going back. They'll fight tooth and nail, and they'll come for you harder than before. Margaret touched Richard's handwriting again, her throat aching. "We can't turn away now. If we stop, everything he fought for dies with him." Karen nodded slowly. "Then we'll need to make allies. Real ones. I know a journalist, she's stubborn, and she hates North Star with a passion. If we give her pieces of this, she'll dig." Ethan's face hardened. "Then let's start with Marissa. If the world sees her for what she is, her hold on me is gone forever." Karen hesitated. "Careful. Marissa's dangerous because she has nothing to lose. Expose her too soon, and she'll strike back." Margaret pressed her palms against the table. "Then we strike first. But carefully. Richard left us the map. Now we have to follow it. That night, after Karen left, Margaret sat by the fire with Ethan beside her. Snow tapped against the windows. The documents and USB lay safely hidden under the floorboards. Ethan broke the silence. "Mom, do you ever wonder if Dad knew this would fall on you? That maybe he was preparing you all along?" Margaret's chest tightened. "Every word he left me feels like a warning wrapped in love. He didn't want this for me, but he trusted me to bear it if it came." She looked at her son, her eyes wet. "And now I trust you. Don't falter, Ethan. Not again." He squeezed her hand firmly. "I won't." For a moment, warmth filled the room, fragile, but real. Margaret allowed herself to breathe, to believe that they might be strong enough. But just as she rose to douse the fire, a sharp knock rattled the front door. Mother and son froze. Margaret's pulse surged. She motioned for Ethan to stay back, then stepped cautiously to the door. She pressed her ear to the wood. Silence. Another knock, 3 sharp raps that seemed to split the night. "Who is it?" she demanded, her voice trembling but firm. No answer. Only the hiss of wind. Ethan moved beside her, his jaw tight. "Don't open it, Mom." But Margaret's hand had already reached for the latch. Slowly, she opened the door a crack. Snow blew in, and on the porch lay another envelope, small and pale against the wood. Margaret bent, picked it up, and shut the door quickly, bolting it behind her. Ethan hovered, his face tense. "What now?" She tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in block letters. "The binder and the USB belong to us. Return them within 48 hours, or Ethan will not walk free." Margaret's vision blurred. She clutched the page, her chest heaving. Beside her, Ethan's face drained of color, his eyes wide with shock. "Mom," he whispered. Margaret sank into a chair, her hand trembling, the note fluttering like a blade in the lamplight. She whispered into the silence, half to Ethan, half to Richard's memory. "They're not after me anymore. They're after my son." The clock ticked heavily in the silence, its sound louder than the storm outside. The threat was no longer vague, it was explicit, carved into every word of the note. Margaret clutched Ethan's hand tightly, the fear almost breaking her, but beneath it burned something fiercer. Rage. She whispered into the night. "They think they own him, but they've forgotten who is Mother Island." Yet as she held the letter, the question gnawed at her. How far were they willing to go to reclaim Ethan, and how much would she have to sacrifice to keep him free? Margaret sat still in her kitchen, the threatening letter trembling in her hands. Her whole life she had learned to endure in silence, but this time, silence would save no one. Ethan sat across from her, his eyes filled with shame and fear. She gripped her son's hand, her voice steady and low. "You are my blood. They can threaten to take the house, the land, the money, but they will never take you away from me." The next morning, Margaret and Karen carried the entire file and the USB to the federal courthouse in Burlington. Once the evidence was revealed, it was no longer rumor, it was a network of corruption, financial fraud and shadow contracts tied directly to North Star and the firm of Latham and Rowe. The case quickly escalated into a criminal investigation. News spread across Vermont. Men who once seemed untouchable now faced exposure. Marissa vanished from Burlington, leaving Ethan behind with nothing but his shame and a chance to start again. Margaret stood outside the courthouse, the winter wind biting her cheeks, but she did not tremble. Ethan approached, lowering his head. "I let them lead me astray, but because of you, I found my way back." Margaret placed her hand on his shoulder, tears slipping down her cheeks, though her gaze burned bright. "Not because of me, because you chose to return. Your father would be proud of you." A month later, her small Burlington home glowed again, not with the fire of conflict, but with laughter. Ethan often came for dinner, sometimes with old friends. Karen still visited, and Dorothy, the neighbor who had stood up for her, never failed to bring warmth. The house that once echoed with betrayal now pulsed with life. Margaret sat on her porch. The bonsai Richard had left her blooming with new shoots. She whispered into the wind, "We kept it all, Richard. And more, we kept the soul of this family." In that moment she understood. Her strength had never come from deeds or bank accounts. It came from love, from patience, from dignity. Even in her later years, she was strong enough to protect what was sacred, her family. The story did not end with the judge's gavel, but with the gentle whisper of wind through the bonsai's branches, a symbol that had endured. Though the storm had passed, Margaret knew life ahead would still hold its trials. Yet she was no longer alone. Ethan had come home. The house still stood, and Richard's legacy lived on. And as a timeless reminder, Margaret smiled softly and whispered, "Dignity never expires." This story carries a weight far beyond the walls of Margaret's modest home in Vermont. At its heart, it speaks to a universal truth. Dignity, once rooted, can withstand storms that threaten to tear us apart. Many of us, especially in our later years, understand the quiet strength required to face betrayal from the very people we once nurtured. Margaret's journey reminds us that resilience is not about shouting louder than our enemies, but about standing tall when the world expects us to bow. The value of family is tested most sharply when greed collides with love. Ethan's betrayal, fueled by fear and manipulation, reflects a pain countless parents know, the heartbreak of watching a child lose their way. Yet Margaret shows us that forgiveness is not weakness. By choosing to stand firm without surrendering her compassion, she illuminates the path of healing, even when scars run deep. This story also honors the legacies we build with those we love. Richard's bonsai, his hidden notes, and his trust in Margaret symbolize the enduring power of memory and values. True inheritance is not just property or wealth, it is wisdom, integrity, and courage passed from one generation to the next. For anyone who has felt invisible, underestimated, or cast aside, Margaret's victory is more than legal, it is spiritual. She proves that age does not erase relevance, that silence does not equal surrender, and that dignity, once held close, can be a shield stronger than fear. In a society where betrayal can fracture even the closest bonds, this story reminds us that justice is possible, healing is real, and above all, dignity never expires.